Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. So today we're going to be doing our final election prediction for Tuesday's runoff election in the state of South Carolina. It's going to be a very interesting race. I'm going to break it all down for you in today's video. Okay, so this runoff election, there are going to be two candidates in this race. There's Lieutenant Governor Pamela Evette and there's Attorney General Alan Wilson. Now, this is the matchup in the South Carolina primary, which took place on I do believe, June 9th. So a little bit now, very quickly gone by, over 2 weeks since then. But Pamela Evette ended up finishing first with 29.09%. Alan Wilson finished second, 26.35%. In overall total votes, there was a little bit shy of 470,000 votes cast, and Evette got about 136,000 or so. Wilson got about 123,000. What's interesting for this primary compared to the runoff is at the time President Trump endorsed and threw all of his weight behind Pamela Evette as the leading Republican candidate he wanted to see be the next governor. Alan Wilson, the Attorney General, did not have the endorsement of the president. Now, it's also worth noting there were a lot of candidates in this race. U.S. Representative Ralph Norman, who finished in third place, got roughly 80,000 votes, 17% of the overall statewide vote. Ron Reddy, a businessman, also got about 67,000 votes and 14.27% of the overall vote. And Nancy Mace, the very outspoken congresswoman, got 57,000 votes, about 12.23%. So there's a lot of vote out there in the state of South Carolina, just based on the primary election, for Evette and Wilson to try and make up the ground there and see what they can ultimately do in this race. Now for the runoff, what's changed? Well, a pretty significant thing has changed. Since Evette and Wilson both advanced to the runoff, we do know President Trump has officially made a co-endorsement in this race. He's sticking with his endorsement of Pamela Evette, so he still endorses him or her, but he also throws the endorsement behind Alan Wilson, who, now having co-endorsed with Evette, to me sounds more like President Trump knows the writings on the wall here, and if there's one thing we know about President Trump, he doesn't like to lose. And when it comes to endorsing candidates, he does not want his chosen candidates to lose those races. We saw this in the Georgia governor primary just last week, where Rick Jackson ended up getting 52.65%. Trump's handpicked endorsed candidate, Burt Jones, also the lieutenant governor of the state of Georgia, ends up trailing and losing very narrowly, 47.35%. And clearly that struck Trump the wrong way. It's also worth noting the Iowa governor's race from beforehand, the Zach Land versus, I believe it was Randy Feenstra race. We can even see here when Zach Land ended up getting 37.8% of the vote, Trump endorsed Randy Feenstra, 37.01%. Though they're narrow losses, Trump does not like to endorse the candidate that loses. So he may see what's going on in the South Carolina primary, and you could say he's hedging his bet. You could say he doesn't want to lose again, but clearly Trump has seen internal polling that shows Evette doesn't have much of a chance of winning, and he wants to endorse Wilson and Evette to avoid that being the situation. And looking at the polling averages on the website PollsMax, Alan Wilson currently, in the handful of polls that we have, I do believe there's only been 4 in the race so far. And there was another poll I just did a short on for Inside Elections, but it showed Wilson leading like 61-29. Alan Wilson currently on their average has a lead of 24.2% over Pamela Evette, and he's already breaking 50% of the vote. It's looking very bleak for Pamela Evette's chances here, and I think that definitely played a role in Trump's decision to endorse Wilson and Evette in this race to essentially save face and acknowledge that Wilson will probably win. It's worth noting as well that two candidates that were in the race, and both Nancy Mace and Ralph Norman, who were running against Alan Wilson and Pamela Evette, both have endorsed Alan Wilson. Ron Reddy, the businessman and former governor candidate who finished in 4th place, declined to endorse either candidate. But in the early polling that we've seen thus far, Wilson's at 63% in the most recent JMC Analytics poll. Evette's only at 28%. National Public Affairs has Evette at 36, but Alan Wilson at 52. And then going back to Opinion Diagnostics, they've had 2 polls come out in the last month or so, and they have shown Alan Wilson leading over Evette by a good amount in the first poll and about 7 points in the second one. So what are we looking for here in terms of a general election prediction for this race? I know that's what we came here for. Yes, we came here for the commentary to see how this race is looking, but we came for the election prediction. I wouldn't be shocked if it ends up being something like the Texas U.S. Senate race, where Paxton and Cornyn, polls showed it relatively close, but once President Trump threw his support around Ken Paxton, we saw Paxton win a lot of the vote against Cornyn. Paxton ends up winning almost every single county in the state except for 2. In Kennedy County, which only had about 8 total votes, and in Austin and Travis County, which was very competitive after being a very strong, big stronghold for Cornyn in the Republican primary. With Wilson now having the endorsement of both Trump, or having the endorsement of Trump, and Evette also having the endorsement of Trump, I think we're going to see a lot of momentum here in this race, clearly on the side of Alan Wilson, and to me it's looking more and more likely that Alan Wilson will win this primary and win it rather handily. So in terms of a election prediction for what I would say this race currently is for Alan Wilson or Pamela Evette, I flipped the colors from Decision Desk. I had Wilson in red and Evette in blue, or Evette in yellow. I think we see Wilson win, and I would have him winning by a safe Republican margin, which is over 15% of the vote. 15% of the vote with only 2 candidates in the race, that would be like 57.5 to 42.5. And I think when all the votes are in here, you already see Wilson consolidating a lot of that vote. There is still a good amount of undecided vote, so that could always be a little bit tricky. And you do have to account for the fact that, yes, Evette did finish in first place in the initial primary, getting 29% of the vote, but there were so many candidates in the race, and she was the only Trump-endorsed candidate in the race at the time. Now, with it being a head-to-head runoff race, I think we see Wilson versus Evette, and I think we probably see at a minimum of like a 20-point victory for Wilson over Evette. So I would put this race as safe Republican for Alan Wilson to win over Pamela Evette. I guess they're both Republicans, so safe Republican doesn't really matter so much, but I would put it as safe 20% for Alan Wilson over Pamela Evette at the absolute like bare minimum there. In terms of the general election as a sneak peek preview, PolsMax also has a forecast on this race as well, where Democrat Jermaine Johnson, they're forecasting to face off against Alan Wilson in the general, and they have roughly about a 96.9% chance for Alan Wilson to win. This can sort of be similar to, sort of like a similar of like a Kalshi market and like a political prediction kind of like morphed into one is kind of a way to forecast it, I guess you could say, but yeah, they have Wilson heavily favored to win this race. They even give a nice little county layout here and going through county by county how they currently have it. And their simulated results and their distributions here, you would see that the most common one falls between a 10 to 20 point Republican win and a 20 to 30 point Republican win. So that's where things currently have it. They have it around, I think it was, what was the margin? 21.7% is their projected margin for this race. They only give it a 2.76% chance that Johnson could win the general election based on this. So it looks very, very likely that we're going to see Wilson win here. Their projected vote share has Wilson at 60.9%, Johnson at 39.1% of the vote in their simulations here. Also shows a breakdown of the state of South Carolina. You see Trump winning it by 17.9% in 2024. Tim Scott, won it by 25.9% in 2022. Lindsey Graham did only win the state by 10.3%, though, and he is on the same ballot in this election. So that could be something interesting to keep an eye out for. In 2022, Henry McMaster won it by 17.4%. So they have it going for Wilson by more than the last governor's race where McMaster won by 17.4. So that's interesting to see how it goes. Their estimated odds of winning for each candidate, and they do it based on their 100,000 simulations, showed that Wilson would win 96.9% of the time, Johnson 3.1% of the time there. Relatively pretty consistent numbers, so very interesting. I mean, no surprises. Looking at the governor's map here, my prediction would definitely 100% pretty much agree with them. South Carolina is a very reliably red state, and even in 2026, which the Democrats are supposed to have a very good night in the midterms, I highly doubt we're going to see a Democrat win South Carolina at the governor level or the Senate level, but definitely not at the governor level. So the general election, I'd put it as safe for the Republican, but for the runoff, Alan Wilson versus Pamela Evette, I would have it going as safe over 15% for Alan Wilson as my final prediction against Pamela Evette, both having the endorsement of Donald Trump. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'd really appreciate it if you did. If you could please hit like and subscribe, as it really helps out me and my channel and helps push my video out on YouTube to other people interested in watching it like yourself. So I'd really appreciate it if you could do that. For now, though, that is it. Thank you so much for watching, and hope to see you in a future video.